Welcome everyone to the latest installment of the Foreman Community Demo. Today we have about a half hour of demos and a reminder to everyone watching that we'll be taking questions on the Q&A app as well as in IRC. And a reminder that the Q&A app is a little bit delayed, so your question may get answered a little after you've asked it, but presenters will stick around to be able to answer those questions. With that, we'll get started right away with Chris talking about Yum repo export and import.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris. This is the first Foreman demo I've done, so I'm kind of new to the team. Previously, I worked on Pulp and Candlepin and a few other things. But so let me dive into the demo. Let me share my screen 1 second. Are you all able to see my browser okay?
We can.
All right, perfect. So I've been working on, Tom McKay and I have been working on exporting and importing Yum repositories. So the main use case for this would be if you had, say, like a Foreman instance that was connected to the internet, but then other instances on your internal network that were not connected to the internet. The main reason you would want to do that is for like security reasons, like if you had like an air-gapped network or a network where internet access to the internet at large was really locked down, you would want to sync to one place and then kind of walk that sync over via like a USB key or even burning an ISO to your other systems. So in order to facilitate that, we're adding some functionality to Catello related to Yum repository import and export. So the first thing I wanted to show is if we look at the settings tab and then look at Catello, I added the Pulp export destination setting, which is basically an on-disk location for export for where the export should live after you actually call the export. So so basically after you do the installation, you go to this tab, set up where you want your export to live. And then, so for right now, you have to also set some additional SE Linux permissions, but later on, that stuff will probably get like wrapped up as part of installer or something to set that. But right now, it's a little bit of a manual process, so you're not having to disable SE Linux. And then after that setting's done, I'm going to switch over to my browser, to my terminal, and make some REST calls. Are you all able to see my browser now? Or my terminal, I mean?
Yep.
All right, fantastic. So I have my Catello repo exports directory, which is empty right now. So what I can do is I can make a REST call to actually perform an export, and then have the contents of that repo then thrown on disk in that location. So right now, it goes pretty fast, but right now it's the current PR I have in is for just doing it based on a repository, but later you will also be able to do it like based on repos in a content view or repos in an environment. But like I said though, just for this PR, we're just trying to get a lot of the plumbing down, so it's based on repos. So now that I run that export, you can see I have the export directory, and if I look in here, you can actually see all of the RPMs that got exported. So at this point, I can actually add a repo to an existing product, and then import the contents that I've exported into that new repo. So let me switch back to my browser again. And then if I go to products, Yeah, my laptop's being a little bit slow, but so it should load pretty soon though.
While it loads, we have one question for you already. Do the listing files get extracted as well?
The listing files get created as well, yeah. So basically all that we're doing is we're calling, making calls into Pulp, and then Pulp already has export functionality for repositories, so it I believe it creates the listing file. So I have fake product here, and if I drill down into this, I'm going to create a new repository, a new empty repository. All right, demo repo 2. Let me just get the number, repo 11. And then, so I've created a new repo. You can see there's no packages or anything in there. So I'm going to switch back to my terminal now.
Try to wrap up in the next 30 seconds.
Okay, yeah, I can do it. And then going back to my terminal, I can do the run the sync on that repo 11. What this does is it kicks off the sync, but it uses the on disk location, and then you can see I have that source URL set in there. And then finally, switching back, should be able to now refresh this and then see this get updated. Yeah, I think it knows I'm out of time. That's why it's being slow. This is the last step, though. And then you get perfect. So you can see here it actually performed the import and loaded the packages again. So that's it for this for what we've done this time. Next time we're going to add some additional functionality to it. So that's pretty much it. So let me unshare now.
All right. If you have any other questions for Chris around that, please submit them. We'll come back to him if they appear. Next up, we'll move over to Stephen to talk about remote execution's next iteration.
Hi. So I'm going to demo some of the new features that were in the most recent release of remote execution. If you would like to find out more about that release, there's an email to Foreman users and some things that we'd like you to try if you install the plugin. So this release, we had about 30 bug fixes and small features. So I'm going to demo a few of the features. The first change you'll notice when you go to create a new job execution, when you change the query, you'll see this new preview button here. If you click it, you can actually see which hosts resolve to your query. The next feature that we introduced is the ability to change the SSH user that remote execution is using. By default, we use root. You can now set a new default in the settings. If you'd like to override it at the host or host group level, you can do that by setting a parameter of the same name. you can set the parameter on the host at the host group level, and wherever else you can set parameters in Foreman. Fantastic. If my dev box was working, that would have worked. The next feature that we have is we've distributed with this iteration a snippet to use for provisioning your hosts. When you provision a host using Foreman, whether you're using Kickstart or pre-seed or image-based, you can use this snippet called remote execution SSH keys. All this is doing is creating the authorized key file and putting the SSH keys for all the proxies that are applicable for this host. To use this, if you're using Kickstart, just include the snippet in your post statement, and you'll see that it gets rendered. You'll see that it's using the vagrant user, which is the new default I set earlier. If you're using pre-seed or image-based, you can put the snippet in your finished template, and it will do the same. If you'd prefer to keep your SSH keys up to date on a more frequent basis than at provisioning, because you may add more SSH proxies or change keys eventually, you can take advantage of the fact that we now put the SSH keys and the user that remote execution is going to use in the ENC output. So if you look, there's two new parameters here, one for the remote execution SSH user and one for the SSH keys. So you could use Puppet or Salt or whatever configuration management system you're using to keep those up to date. That's it. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Stephen. Again, if you have questions, please submit them, and we'll get to them after the next presentation, and ask that Stephen stick around. With that, we'll move over to Daniel to talk about Foreman Ansible.
Okay, let me share the screen. All right, so first I'm going to explain how you install Foreman Ansible. Foreman Ansible is a plugin that has not been released yet. You can go to this repository in GitHub, deal.g Foreman Ansible, and you can find some instructions here on the README. The way it works is by setting what they call callback plugin in Ansible. The way you do this is by going to your ansible.config. I'm going to highlight that. That's on etc Ansible. It's the basic Ansible configuration file. And here you have a variable called callback plugins where you can specify a directory where you want to put your callback plugins in. Alright, so in this case I have my callback plugins in .ansible/plugins/callback plugins, and in there I have my Foreman callback plugin. I'm going to open it just to show you how is it configured so far. That you can grab that callback plugin from here, from extras and Foreman callback.py. And in there, you just have to substitute the Foreman URL by your Foreman URL, and that's all that you need to do. Substitute the Foreman URL by your Foreman instance, copy that file to your callback plugin directory, and install the plugin. That's all that it's needed. There's no configuration within Foreman or anything like that. The use case for it right now is just registering hosts in Foreman and importing facts and reports from Ansible. So I'm going to show it in a second. So first, I'll remove this one host. It's just my computer. I'm going to delete it from Foreman and re-register it through Ansible. Sorry. Okay, so I come here. I have a little playbook here that it just installs Cockpit, and by running the playbook, by just calling Ansible playbook, or by running Ansible setup, so by running the Ansible module setup on any host, I can do it. I'm going to run the playbook just because when you run a playbook through Ansible playbook, it runs the module setup first. So it doesn't really matter if you just want to call setup to register a host, that will work too. But in this case, we also get a report for what happened during that playbook run. All right, so now we should have a host, local host. Yep. It got the model from the facts, it got the operating system from the facts in my computer, and it got a report. Okay, it's just showing it's not showing anything on runtime because I have not found a way to measure the playbook runs yet. It's a little tricky. I found a way to show to count the resources that are applied. In this case, it's just one resource, the cockpit plugin. I'm going to show it again. It's the only thing that I'm doing. That's one task, and it was successful. So as you can see here, it imported the architecture, IP, and so forth just fine. Status is okay because the report was imported properly, and you can see it imported the information for all interfaces properly. So after that, after you have your host in Foreman, you can do anything. You can check out the reports. We can see that in this case, Cockpit was already installed, so we get this message, hey, Cockpit was already installed. If the task hadn't succeeded, it would have been logged as failed here. I can actually change maybe if I change, and we can see an example of a failed report. Okay. So what else? Oh yeah, you can also browse the host facts here in Foreman. It imports facts not only from Ansible setup. By the way, just so you can take a look at how Ansible facts look like. Aside from Ansible facts, it also imports facts from Factor and oheight. It's basically the state of your system hasn't changed. Okay, we got a failure in the playbook here. All right, so it imported all these facts. You can see some of them, like factor uptime seconds is from, that one's coming from Factor, this other one is coming from Ansible, and I also got it to import nested facts. So there are some facts in Ansible that are hashes, like this one, Ansible ST Linux. We import all of the values for that hash. So for instance, in my case, ST Linux is enforcing. What else can I show? Oh yeah, the failure. If I'm not wrong, we should see, yeah, this. I tried to install a package that didn't exist, Cockpit T, and now we should see a failure here in reports, and we can come here and take a look at what happened. No package matching Cockpit T. So any user that is using Ansible and Foreman can just go back to the playbook and the name to an actual package that exists. And that's about it. It's not released yet because it's lacking two very important things. One of them is SSL support. But that should be trivial. It's literally adding SSL to the callback plugin. So it's just a couple of more options. And the other thing that is lacking is it's not packaged at all. It's just an experiment that I started on my repository like 2 or 3 weeks ago. So you can for the moment come to this repository, test it, and provide some feedback. There are already like 3 or 4 users that are using it somehow in production. One of them has actually contributed recently. So that's it.
All right, we have a couple of questions on IRC for you. So the first is it possible to show the particular resources instead of playbooks? For example, Puppet and Salt, break it down more granularly to packages, services, etc.
Okay, so what it's showing now, it's the what they call tasks in a playbook. So it's just it's not as granular. It just shows tasks. Yeah, that's how it works right now. I'm not sure how. Well, what else can I pick from the playbook?
The other comment from Stephen, who asked the question, is he was mentioned that he's confused between a task and a handler.
A handler is just an action that runs after a task is finished, or well, you can configure it to do something if it fails, or if it's successful, maybe start a service, something like that. So in this case, it was starting the cockpit service after installing the cockpit package. So why is that not a task? I guess tasks are independent from each other, and handlers happen in reaction to what happens in a task.
All right, a couple more questions. First one is the Ansible plugin supported in Community Ansible Core, or is the work tied to Foreman?
If by community Ansible Core means the default Ansible that you can download from Ansible.com, yeah, I'm not modifying Ansible in any way, or I don't have any. Uh, all the changes that I make are part of this interface. They have, like, Foreman has plugins. Ansible has callback plugins. So that's basically the interface that we use to interact. That I use to interact between Foreman and Ansible. But it works with the default Ansible community version. I didn't modify the Ansible program at all. It's an external interface.
And last question is, does Foreman get the name of the playbook as a fact?
Name of the playbook as a fact. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Because it might be on the report, but facts are facts of the host, like different properties of the host itself on which you're running the playbook. But yeah, a playbook is something that you're running on it. It's not part of the. It's not a property of the host. So it might be on the reports. I'm not sure. I'm going to check it now, but it's definitely not imported as a fact.
I think to clarify the question, I think it's, can we tell which playbook ran?
I don't think so. I'm looking now at the reports page, and all I can see is what tasks run and what was the outcome of these tasks, but not the name of the playbook file or anything like that.
All right. Thank you very much. If any further discussions, please take them to IRC or the follow-up on the mailing list for this demo. With that, we'll move on to John to talk about scope search for content hosts and subscriptions.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, let me share my screen.
So right now, we're spending a lot of effort.
Okay, so some updates for scope search. This is part of the larger scope search conversion to from Elasticsearch to the scope search gem, and I've added it for subscriptions. There's quite a few attributes that you can search for on here. I'm not going to go through them all, but they are all coming from Candlepin directly. And so, for example, you can search by name and get the results by name. Other places this is added. This is also added on content hosts. When you're adding a subscription to a content host, you can go through and search on that. And when you are adding a subscription to a activation key, you can go through and search for that. And these are also, these can be on the list remove as well when you have them attached to an activation key or a content host. And I've also added scope search for content hosts, and this can be searched by activation key, content view, description, environments, facts, host collection, and name. And this will be on this page, and I have a pull request to add it to the host collections page where you can add and remove a content host. Some other news from scope search: I believe Elasticsearch is removed, so that is good news and definitely cause to celebrate. Other than that, that's about it for me.
One question for you. Can you search by red, yellow, green? I think it means can you search basically by the subscription status and the color they're in?
Not yet, but I can look into adding that.
All right. Thank you, John. If any other questions come in, we'll pick them up after the next presentation. And with that, we'll move over to Tom to talk about the Rails 4 migration.
Hi, I'm just gonna move to the right screen. Can you see the presentation?
Looks good.
Okay, awesome. So finally, after almost 6 months of working on migrating Foreman to Rails 4, the time has come. To summarize it, before I even start, the changes are basically differences in API. There's nothing really big except some code style changes, which are important, obviously, because they are not backwards compatible, which is why the whole task took so long. But for developers working right now, the move to Rails 4 is not going to be a very big issue. Some differences would be scopes and associations. If you have conditions, they will go into the scope, into a lambda, which will, as you see on line 8, has many locations with conditions taxonomy type is location, would become has many locations where there is a lambda, which has a scope of where taxonomy type is location. If you have a uniqueness on the scope you're building, it will go into that lambda. So if I wanted to have only unique locations, then I would add after the where I would add .unique, and that's it. Some other changes. all attributes in Rails 4 are by default protected. That means that if you are writing a new model or adding a new attribute to a model, you have to whitelist it using attribute accessible, or later when we move to strong parameters, you will have to put it in the right place. We still don't know how this is going to look, because we have to be able to extend we have to be able to extend the list of whitelisted attributes from plugins, which is not something which can be easily done using the straightforward way strong parameters works. Some scopes are deprecated. There is no scoped scope. That is actually the old scope, which in Rails 3 basically made the query on the spot and turned the association into an array. There are some deprecated stuff in active record, in active in action resource and stuff like that. They're mostly styling issues, and if you use what you're used to, you will see either a deprecation error or no method error. There is a small change in friendly ID. What you used to use, just the find method, you have to be specific and say host.friendly, which means and when I use find, I actually use the friendly ID find. That's the main change in friendly ID. Routes. Rails 4 fixed a silly error, which was done when Rails started to be developed. Put is not really update. It is a create only HTTP verb, but we used put for update. Put should be patch, and in Rails 4, when you use resource something, a patch request will be routed to the update method in the controller. Also, if you have put in your in our routes RB file, you should use patch. Currently, patch also catches put requests, but it will be deprecated. So when you're developing new stuff using Rails 4, for instance, in the JavaScript you will write, you will have to use patch instead of put, because otherwise in the next version it will be deprecated and won't work. There are many small deprecations. For instance, find by foo and bar, which used to go through method missing and was really bad on performance, is now deprecated. So you have to do user.where username is the doctor, and whatever is something else, dot first. Also, the final create, the same issue, because we don't want to have to go through method missing. We are going to use user.where username the doctor, final first or create. The list is very long. There are many small deprecations. You will basically see them once you work on the code. You will just get a no method error and Google it. It's not a big deal, and the list is just too long to go over. Plugins are usually not very. The changes are very small. The API changes which I talked about are obvious. You have to add the attribute accessible to new attributes you're using. And there is a small difference in how we register the migration path, except that nothing is really a big difference. There's a link to the list of stuff which have to be done in every plugin we use. And the best way to see the differences is just to go to the Rails 4 PR and see what we've done. That's about it.
All right, one question on IRC is, why is extending adder accessible hard from plugins? You can have several adder accessible in the same model.
It's not hard to extend from plugins. You can have several attribute accessible. I was talking about the strong parameters. Once we get to the strong parameters, which are defined in the controller, then extending that from plugins might be a little bit harder. That's why we had the initial version of the Rails 4 branch there was a real mess with strong parameters, and that's why we moved back to attribute accessible to the old way of doing things. It's not hard. In the current version, it's not hard. In the version which we will end up shipping in the next version of Foreman, it's going to be a bit tricky.
Great, thank you much, Tom. Next up will be Andres, talk about new compliance reports for Foreman OpenSCAP.
Hi, I hope you can see my screen. Today I'll be talking about the changes that were made during the past few weeks. They concern mainly the compliance reports and how these are processed. When I go to my client and I want to generate a new report, I execute Foreman Scap client in the same way it was done before. When I look at my proxy, I see the report was received by proxy and processed. Now the parsing of the report is done on the proxy, and proxy sends JSON to the Foreman. If we take a look at the Foreman server, we can see that this is the beautiful data that we have just received. And now if I refresh my browser, I should see that I already have the new report. It should take just a second, yes. And if I want to view a report, I go to the views. This view is similar to the one we already have for Puppet reports. It's because the compliance reports are now part of the new STI. You can see all the rules and those that have failed and passed, and also graphs. We can also view the full report just as before. The file is stored on the proxy and is retrieved on demand. So this is the view that was available before as well. It is well embedded in iframe, and we can also download the bzip report from the proxy if we want. So that's about it really. Are there any questions?
We will see if any come in, so please stick around. In the meantime, I will go over some community announcements from Greg, who, as you could tell, was not able to be here today. The first is that Config Management Camp FOSDEM request for more talks. Please see the mailing list for details. Please think and submit talks. The second is a case study was done yesterday on high availability. You can find it on YouTube. I'm showing a quick preview of it. And you can probably see the mailing list as well for information about it. The other next thing is a deep dive coming up next week on Windows imaging. That will be next Thursday. I believe the last thing is to show the new Foreman blog, which is live on the website itself. It is now available in GitHub at foreman.org. So you can write and submit blog posts through a pull request like you would other code, and get it onto the blog that way, which should and hopefully encourage more people to submit blog posts, as well as guest blog posts, users, developers. So with that, and I don't see any further questions, I want to thank all of our presenters today, thank all of our users watching live, and anyone in the future. A reminder that future discussions or discussions post this point around what you saw here can be had on the mailing list for the thread around this particular demo. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you in 3 weeks.